Pop Save the USA.
Hello, hi, welcome all. My name is Cole, and welcome to my first ever podcast. This is Pop Save the USA. This audio feature is something I've been thinking about creating for a long time. I'm a person who's pretty passionate about listening and talking about music, and I thought producing a show about music would be the perfect way for me to have an outlet to talk about these things. Pop Save the USA is a podcast that presses play on all the popular genres of music in the United States to cultivate a conversation about different topics in music and the impact it has on Americana. I'm interested in talking about all the ways that one can interpret music, how it gets developed, why we listen to what we're listening to, what impact it has on society, the different relationships happening within pop music, and what we can glean from the art, and many other little odds and ends. I suppose you might be wondering what qualifies me to be talking about pop music. Well, I have a BFA. Well, a lot of people can say they have BFAs, but I have a bachelor's in fine arts. So I guess that's kind of a glorified research degree, a glorified psychology degree, whatever you want to call it. I just know how to research things and make something else out of it. Um, I mean, I have a lot of passion for music. I have a passion for the art, and I have a passion for the conversation. For real though, I loved exploring the over of pop music for a long time. I remember the first time I discovered iTunes when I was a child. I had my little iPod Touch, and I would sit there scrolling through the top 100 charts. I would just sit there listening to all the little preview tracks that were offered with each song. Do you remember how you could click on the little icon of the song and it would play like a 30-second preview of what you could buy? I thought that was so fun, and as someone who wasn't given a bunch of money to be buying music all the time, I was going onto iTunes and just listening to all the little previews constantly and seeing what people were buying and what they might have been uh, what they might have been trying to say by the pop music they were listening to. I would even like get my sister's friends and just bring them over to like listen to what was popular in the moment. And this stuff was happening like easily at the age of mm, 10, 11. Yeah. Of course, I have many other childhood influences before then. Like, my dad's always been really into music. He's a huge Beatles fan. Um, Big 80s rock people. Ever since I can remember, we had been having little dance parties with my parents. Like, we would turn on the radio in our stereo system and put on a little CD and just dance around the living room and having a fun time as a family. It was very wholesome stuff. I know my mom really cherishes those memories, so I cherish them as well. So, being new to this whole podcast thing, I've been thinking about different ways to open this up. And I thought maybe I would just get a little more personal, not like tell you my deepest, darkest secrets, but I would at least maybe talk about things that I've been thinking about this week before we get into the main topic of this podcast today. So let's talk about the news. Epstein files, am I right? Yeah, that's crazy. I suppose I don't have much to say about it. I'm not sure when this podcast is going to come out, but one thing's for certain is we're around a week away at this point of recording from hearing whether or not the Epstein files will be released. And it'll be really interesting to know if they do end up releasing. I know future me is certainly feeling some kind of odd emotion. Lately, I have been watching Sex and the City, Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, and Below Deck. All my Bravo heads stand up. I need to know more people that are watching Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. Below Deck Mediterranean is also fantastic this season. I think those are easily two of the best produced shows on Bravo right now. And I don't know where my life would be right now without them. I kind of depend on them for some kind of enjoyment throughout the week right now. Life is a bit monotonous as I'm a little sick of my job. I won't be going into what I do on here because I feel like that's a bit too much of a breach of my personal boundaries, but I'm definitely actively looking for something else. And if I can get that in the new year, that would be fantastic. Plus, I'm getting kicked off of insurance in April, so whoop whoop. Of course, I've been working on this podcast. I've been putting in the most research that I can to this topic. It might feel a little bare bones, but this is my first time doing it, so I'm giving myself some leeway. For the most part, I feel like I have a good base research for this episode, and it's enough to last me um, at least the length of a short episode. In the future, these episodes might get longer, so we'll see what happens. Overall, recently, I have been trying to recenter myself in my creativity. I found that for the last 2 years, I have kind of been in a place of stagnation when it comes to my creativity. As a person with a bachelor's of fine arts, it's kind of disheartening to think that I lost my voice as a creative. I really don't know what I am pursuing at the moment. I think I'm kind of stretching myself out into different things I love, and making this podcast is one of the things that I'm doing in order to do that. Whether or not something comes of this, I don't care. I just want to get myself out there and start doing the things that I love. This sounds kind of simple, but it's a little cheesy, but it truly is the best way to go about doing things. I finished up reading The Artist's Way recently, and I don't know if I would necessarily call that book life changing for me, but I think it's certainly reinvigorated a sense of childhood wonder. No, that might be a little overboard. It has reignited the little monkey brain within me to start wanting to create again.
Another one.
And I think, unfortunately, growing up, especially in the early 2000s and mid 2010s, we're kind of taught a lot in the public school system to shoot for high scores on tests, quizzes, and to hunker down and study and just do assignment after assignment without any regards to any other things that life may have to offer. My high school never offered a home ec class. There were not a lot of practical skills being taught, and that can probably be said the same for many other public institutions. But where was I going with this? I then started to understand a little bit more of what life has to offer in college, and I picked a fine arts degree because, truthfully, I had wanted to go into graphic design when I started college, and I didn't have much of a portfolio at that point in high school, and I don't now either. But we're working on that. So, not getting into the program that I wanted to initially when I went to college was a little disheartening, but I wanted to make the most out of it, and I decided to stick with fine arts and make a career out of that. And that's where we are now, I suppose. And the school that I went to certainly whipped me into shape when it came to understanding creativity and all the different forms it takes. But it was so intense that I think maybe I got some creative burnout towards the end of it. And the past 2 years may have been me just wanting to hunker down and not think about trying to make art for a bit. That combined with the current state of the United States and capitalism inhibiting creativity as a whole within the past 5 years. A lot of creative things seem to be following trend cycles at this point more than anything, and it's kind of disheartening to watch. Of course, you could say I'm following a cycle of trends by making a podcast right now, especially a podcast about pop music where a gay man analyzes different pop artists. But this is what I want to do, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Some things I've been doing besides podcasting to reinvigorate my creative drive is I've been 3D modeling again, and it's fun. I uh, I kind of fell out of love of wanting to do video game art, which is part of the reason why I went to school. I don't think it was necessarily something I was never not interested in. I think I might have just become disheartened by the intensity of trying to get into a career like that. And the video game industry as a whole right now is suffering because of job cuts, company buyouts, and other things that the big guy is making happen. So I didn't really want to be a part of that. But other than the 3D modeling, I have also been baking a lot more. And I do have a joy for baking because when I think about it, a lot of creativity boils down to being proud that you made something. And with baking, you're able to make something in a very not concise amount of time. You're able to make something at least within a day or two. And seeing the product of what you've made kind of brings some joy into your life because you can say that you've put in some time and effort into making something that you and possibly others can enjoy. And that's why I love it. It brings together community. Who doesn't love community? I love community. I mean, for God's sake, I am recording this right now at a public institution where I can do this for free, which is pretty epic. I would record this at my apartment, but it is simply just too loud. Like, I live on a really busy street, and it's kind of between, it's, the block I live on is kind of between two busy streets, so you're getting noise on both sides, and it's just not the most ideal place to be recording a podcast. And I can't do it at night because I live across the street from a music bar.
Every night.
And you hear
No
it
sleep.
throughout the apartment for the entire night. And they will play up until 2, 3 a.m. sometimes, which I enjoy. Sometimes they produce good music. Sometimes. key key emphasis on the sometimes. There is some shit playing that comes through once in a while. But it's kind of funny when it happens because I like hearing the bad parts of music as well. Anyways, I have been finding myself reinvigorating my stagnation recently, and I kind of want to take this first episode to talk about an example of creative stagnation versus creative evolution within pop music. So, growing up in the 2010s, I think the most two prominent icons of pop music were easily Lady Gaga and Katy Perry. They're not the pop icons of pop music, but they were the pop icons of the 2010s at least. Um, their careers were definitely coming up around the similar time frames. I want to make it clear that in this episode, as we're talking about Lady Gaga and Katy Perry, this is not a comparison of their personalities or a history of their careers, and it's more of an analysis of how their creative directions and their perception divulged down two very separate paths. And it's less about me comparing them to their core as people, but more about analyzing their passion for their artistic drive or lack thereof, and following their creative callings, and how it can be used as an example of why we need to stick to our guns for the long haul if we ourselves want to be understood by others. Because evidently, where we have landed with Katy Perry and Lady Gaga are two very different realities. So, a little tidbit about their early careers. Again, this isn't a history, but I just feel like it's important that we at least have a baseline, have something that we can at least think about and ruminate on. This is very brief, but I want to read a little tidbit from the Harvard Crimson. So, Katy Perry is the daughter of an evangelical pastor and is relatively well known, but even those aware of her Christian roots are probably unaware of her Christian rock album. And before Perry broke onto the pop scene by declaring that she'd kissed a girl, the woman then known as Katy Hudson tried her hand at religious pop, releasing a self titled CD that sold roughly 100 copies. And then she went into the I Kissed a Girl era, of course, and it wasn't her biggest album, but One of the Boys was certainly her first big break. And to contrary belief, Lady Gaga did not emerge from the womb fully masked and meat dressed. Um, there's like early recordings of her playing at bars in New York City, singing at the piano, and doing small bar shows. And at that point, she was still going by her name Stephanie Germanotta, and
Don't call me Gaga.
wasn't doing her big pop hits yet. It was a lot more stripped back and to the not the bare bones of music, but it was her musical style was very straightforward. So I want to skip forward a bit and think about where they were before what I believe is pivotal points within their creative drives. The pivotal point I want to reference is Lady Gaga's art pop album and Katy Perry's Prism album. Um, Before this pivotal point, they were easily at the height of their careers. Like, Lady Gaga was coming off of Born This Way, and Born This Way wasn't her highest selling pop album, but it was easily like her second or third. I can't remember which. And it was still huge. Um, Born This Way was a huge, meaningful queer pop album. And at the same time, Katy Perry was coming off Teenage Dream, which was a long running album cycle. And more than 3/4 of the album was promoted as singles, I believe. Like, you have most of Katy Perry's mega hits coming off of Teenage Dream. My personal views of Lady Gaga and Katy Perry as a child during that time was I kind of viewed them both as the quirky, campy girls of pop music. When I was a child, like, I knew who Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera was, but they were not serving in the same way that Katy Perry and Lady Gaga were. Um, the campiness of Lady Gaga's meat dress, and if you think back to Katy Perry in California Girls, where she puts on the whipped cream blaster titty attachments, that was, in the eyes of a 2010s child, crazy. Like, what were they doing? And they certainly had the eyes on them, that's for sure. They managed to feel distinctly themselves in this moment, um, but still managed to draw some bits of comparison because they were both campy, just campy in very different lights. Gaga certainly took more of a punk attitude, And Katy Perry was, Candyland. She was a teenage pop princess. But as these eras started to flow away, I think people were hungry for something new from these artists. People were starting to get a little tired of these images, not in a bad way, but just craving something more from them. A little bit of a shakeup. So, 2013 hits, and boom, Prism drops. Boom, Art Pop drops. And since they're dropping around similar times, of course the media news outlets has to pit them against each other. And for what? It was clear that Art Pop was a bit more of a flop at the time compared to Prism. Prism, of course, had Katy Perry's biggest single of all time, Dark Horse. It was huge. It was everywhere. Roar was huge as well. I remember, I think it was watching either USA Today or the Today Show. I can't remember which, but Katy Perry put on a whole music video contest for Roar, which was crazy. She was having high schools compete to make a homemade music video that took place at their schools. And if I can't remember exactly, but it may have tied into anti-bullying campaigns at the time, which was huge in 2013. So I can imagine it was a good promotional tool, that's for sure. It was a good image for Katy Perry at the time. But musically, Prism expanded on Katy Perry's sound. Prism expanded on Katy Perry's sound and more mainstream pop music by playing into popular music at the time with some more dance and beat drop influences, especially since Dr. Luke was still on the album. Can I get a womp womp? However, on this same album, she was exploring her relationship with God as well. And you could definitely get a sense that she was sticking to her roots as a pop artist, not really exploring a lot of new themes within her music, but it was just solid music. It was good. People weren't tired of it yet. I think it's interesting at this time because there's a quote that she dropped, I believe, with either Rolling Stone or Billboard, where she says, "I'm really just masquerading as a pop star." And I keep ruminating on that quote as time goes on, and I wonder if she still feels this way, because it kind of feels like that sometimes. So then we go to Art Pop, and for the promotion of Art Pop, it was kind of all over the place. At one point, there was an Art Pop app launched alongside the promotion of the album, and you could make a polymorph object of some sort, and it was certainly a lot more avant-garde. Applause was chosen as the single, and it was probably the best choice for a more mainstream single on the album, but I think it lacked some sort of va-va-voom for the general public, and it didn't catch on as well. And by no means is Applause a bad song. I will hop and jump to it at the club, but I don't think it had the juice for the general public. And art pop in general was totally different in vibe compared to Born This Way, with huge influences of the Ready Made. That's for all my BFAs out there, and artists like Jeff Koons and Andy Warhol being big influences. Gaga produced an album that seeked attention, but kind of lacked an audience. I don't think the avant-garde influences were really touching base with the general public. But that's with the general public. We'll touch more a little bit on that later. Hard-hitting synths and campy arrangement of zippy beats was on this album, and it was kind of different to the clubby yet powerful tones of Born This Way. It wasn't mainstream, but she was certainly following what she loved. You could tell Lady Gaga was onto something in her brain, and it was important for her to explore this at the time. And I think at this time, people saw them as the two biggest names in pop music, and it was easy to try to pit the two against each other. people were constantly comparing the sales numbers of Prism to art pop, especially on Twitter. And when we're talking about album sales, it's really difficult to make an argument that sales equates to artistic integrity because overall, art pop is not about bad album in retrospective. I just think the media has a huge bias for trying to pit women against each other in pop music. Like when we look at Cardi B and Nicki Minaj, granted, they did it to themselves a little bit by fighting at the VMAs, but even Britney and Christina or Taylor Swift and Beyonce, they're always pitting two women in pop against each other. Like when two women are big at the same time, the media has nothing better to do but compare them. And what do people do? Listen to the media of the United States, unfortunately. Why are we still listening to the media of the United States? Like, I can't help but wonder if this had some sort of deep effect on the psyches of both of these women. Obviously, it says something about how their careers developed after this. And again, I'm not on here to necessarily analyze their brains, but the art they make beyond this point could certainly reflect the different feelings they were having. So, as the two icons of pop music transition into their next phases of music, we can start to see some differences in how they approach their artistic drive. We start to see some differences in evolution and stagnation. After Prism, Katy Perry takes a little bit more of a step back from releasing music for a bit. So Prism came out in 2013 and it was kind of milked to death. Of course, Katy Perry went on tour and then she did the Super Bowl, which was crazy. Who remembers Left Shark? Left Shark, kind of a bigger icon than Katy Perry at this point. all great things were coming from this era. She ends up not releasing any new projects until 2017. And in 2017, she arguably released her biggest flop, Witness. And I say arguably because I don't think Witness is necessarily a bad album sonically. There's a couple bops on there. Bon Appetit is a song. I'm not listening to Bon Appetit for artistic integrity. I am listening to Bon Appetit to shake my ass in the club. It has got a funky beat, but I will not acknowledge the Migos part. We do not pay attention to the Migos part. But overall, Witness was a bit of a lackluster album that had subpar reviews. The album kind of had a bit of a mismatch in aesthetics to sound as well. And as she promoted it, it was said to be a political album, but much of the album wasn't really attacking politics at the time. Like, Chained to the Rhythm was the first single produced for the album and released. Um, and that's probably the most political you're getting on the album. It does a bit to dismantle ideas of capitalism in pop music and other sensibilities of capitalism. But other than that, maybe the song, I believe the song is Witness itself, is a little political, but it feels so baseline that it's kind of a just, it's cardboard. It is cardboard political commentary. It kind of wanted to have an experimental vibe, but it was kind of just another vapid pop album in her discography. And I think because of that, it didn't sell well. And I think Katy Perry may have taken that to heart. Also, at this time, she got a fuck ass pixie cut. And there's nothing wrong with a pixie cut. You can rock a pixie cut, but that bleach blonde pixie cut was doing newsworthy segments. it was it was Katy Perry's Miley Cyrus moment, that's for sure. People thought that she was going crazy, and I don't think she was going crazy. I just think she wanted a new image for herself. That's for sure.
Another one.
Meanwhile, Gaga was producing all kinds of art in the time that Katy Perry was promoting Prism up until the release of Witness. In the time that Katy Perry had been taking a break from releasing music, Gaga had released Cheek to Cheek and Cheek to Cheek Deluxe and Joanne. And Gaga was also starring in American Horror Story and was probably preparing for A Star is Born at the time. The general public didn't necessarily have huge reactions to these albums, but they were also quite different from her early career, but not in the same sensibility that art pop was. Cheek to Cheek was a jazz album made in collaboration with Tony Bennett, and Tony Bennett is a renowned jazz singer, and this album ended up winning a Grammy, I believe. And I think Tony and Gaga's friendship became a very beloved friendship amongst the public, and kind of grew a fondness for the public's reception of Gaga. Cheek to Cheek was also a return to form for Gaga at the piano, which is something that's important to her roots. And Joanne was inspired a lot by soft rock, some Americana, and even some dance, just to keep that poppy vibe going. But it certainly wasn't a crowd pleaser. Like, it wasn't a huge selling album, but it was a lot more down to earth, and you could certainly get a sense that Gaga was trying some other things and maybe finding herself again. She took the criticism to heart about art pop and was just exploring. And meanwhile, art pop itself, I think, was starting to gain a cult following. The sleeper stands of art pop are out there, and I was one of them. And me being one of them, it was probably just a huge amount of gay people. And when you think about Katy Perry, does she really have any sleeper albums? Like, I can't really, like, One of the Boys is her first album promoted through a record label, but I don't think of it as like a cult classic. And I think this is important because gay people really are important for the longevity of an artist, and Katy Perry knows that but can't seem to cater to it. My views of Gaga at this point in her career is that like she definitely took some time to explore her art and all the things that she loves: jazz, Americana, the piano, and art in general. Um, Taking time to connect with your roots and the things that you love is really important. While art pop era may have been difficult for Gaga, I think it allowed her to go back to the grindstone and understand how to explore the things that she loves. I think the numbers became less important to her at this point, and her artistry started to become forward again, much like her early career. That isn't to say art pop was a bad album, it wasn't. If anything, it was ahead of its time, and Gaga heard the criticism and decided to work on other things to develop in other ways instead of taking things to heart. I think of her more as an avant garde explorer. Going forward in time a little bit more, we see that Katy Perry and what she starts to release to the public is still kind of subpar. She released some dance singles with some famous producers. She had 365, Never Really Over, and they were pretty successful. I mean, Never Really Over was all over the radio. But then the pandemic hits and she releases Smile, where she's literally dressed as a clown on the cover. um, Many critics and listeners kind of felt that the album was similar to Perry's previous work, much like the sound of Witness. It kind of failed to capture the energy of her earlier hits while still trying to emulate them. Reviewers kind of described the album as an attempt to recapture light, goofy natures of her earlier songs, but it fell out of place for how her career had been maturing. The album also underperformed commercially compared to her previous releases. It did worse than Witness. It had such a mixed reception, and some listeners enjoyed the album's fun and lighthearted feel, but it was so uninspired. Commercially, the album just wasn't successful. Overall, the people were not vibing with it, and the repetitiveness flopped, and it technically performed worse metrically than Witness. Meanwhile, Gaga released Chromatica when the pandemic hit, and music critics largely welcomed the album, viewing it as a triumphant return to Gaga's dance pop roots with more of a personal healing narrative. It had such a more craftsmanship quality to it, and it explored trauma and recovery. It was a bit more like audacious, and as some reviewers described it, glitter dusted. The collaborations on there, like Rain on Me with Ariana Grande and Sign from Above with Elton John, they were different for Gaga, and it was fun to see her exploring with other artists. It was a commercial success of an album, like it did good. It was no Fame Monster or Born This Way, but it was still great. And it was the first female collaboration for Rain on Me to receive a Grammy for Best Pop Duo Group Performance. And Chromatica was nominated Best Pop Vocal Album. And I remember for the Chromatica Ball being a huge, huge era for the pandemic. Like people were going to the Chromatica Ball during the pandemic, which was a choice. But it was certainly bringing people together at a time that they needed. From what I can find, like many fans love this album for its like super dancey vibes and more deep lyrics while still having fun at the club. And don't get me wrong, there were still some negative views about this album. I don't think it was what everyone wanted. It kind of also was a little too repetitive at times, but at any point it wasn't at any point a bad album, that's for sure. I think part of the problem was the promotion of it was interrupted by COVID. And then a year later, she also released Dawn of Chromatica, which was a remix album filled entirely with collaborators. Um, and was epic. Like Charlie XCX is on that album, Shy Girl, Doreen Electra, Bree Runway, lots of great things. So overall, Chromatica was Gaga in full effect again, just inhibited by COVID-19 and some other factors. So I want to take a look at where we are now. Most recently, we have Katy Perry's 143 and Lady Gaga's Mayhem. And the public reception to Mayhem was actually really amazing. It ended up receiving an 8.0 from Pitchfork, which is kind of crazy for Pitchfork, and I don't know if I would have given it that high of a score. But people really responded well to it and called it like a return to form for Gaga. And you can tell that the criticism she had taken in was something that she was really imbuing into her albums. It was a bit more of an industrial pop album, and it was noted for being brighter and funkier than what some people expected. Some people also saw it as a spiritual successor to Born This Way, and other people felt that it was more of the Fame's older sister. It was certainly a more mature Gaga. It was poppy, and it was dancey, and it was fun, but still expanded upon her sound. We even had the Mayhem Ball, which was a huge tour, and I think it had just recently wrapped up at the time of this recording. The overall impact of the album was that it was solidifying Gaga's position as a pop icon again, and it was a successful return to form for her, that's for sure. It certainly wasn't any sort of artistic risk as art pop, but it showed that she was having a willingness to take risks again and reinvent herself because it was a lot different than the previous work that was happening, like Joanne. On the other side of things, 143 was. Oof. 143. What a doozy of an album. Overall, it had a really overwhelmingly negative view, and critics were widely panning it as bland, uninspired, and a career low point. A career low point even lower than Witness, and the general critical consensus was pretty highly critical, and it was leading to what many called probably her worst reviewed album, unfortunately. And as a person who has listened to the album, I can't say it's like horrible, trashy, horrible produced music, but I wouldn't catch myself listening to it again, that's for sure. It received some of Katy Perry's lowest scores on Metacritic, and it just felt like there was a lack of creativity, and many said it sounded dated, and kind of lacked any creative imagination, which is an issue when you're an artist. You don't want to lack creative imagination. And around the release, there was still controversy. Like, the album was shadowed by Dr. Luke being the main producer on the album. And if we know anything about Dr. Luke, you don't want to associate with him. Overall, the fan reception, though, has been pretty divided on it, and I think Katy Cats are having a rough time defending this era. People just found 143 to not have much tact. It felt vapid, and if it had any analysis, it was trying to analyze feminism, and it was doing a very poor job at analyzing feminism. So, with all that we've discussed, I think something can be said about the act of exploring yourself as an artist and how it has an impact on what you produce. When you take the time to feel out the different desires within you, you can discover new things that you haven't known about yourself. As an artist evolves, it's important that we also take in our criticism and use it to our advantage rather than stewing in it as a negative emotion. Katy Perry clearly didn't take the reaction to Prism well, and she was kind of in a period of depression afterwards. That's at least how she describes it. I know she took some time to do some retreats, that's for sure. Unfortunately, I think Katy Perry started to fall into this cycle of stagnation. As Katy Perry says, like, she had bouts of situational depression. Her heart was broken last year because unknowingly I put so much validity in the reaction of the public, and the public didn't react in the way I expected, which I can only imagine that she felt a similar way about 143 because she hasn't really commented much on 143 as a whole. If anything, she has left comments about Woman's World and has tried to explain herself about her feminist ideas on Woman's World that didn't land with the audience. And I think her reaction didn't land as well. On the other side of things, though, when Gaga takes criticism, she really takes it to heart. Gaga has said that criticism was more impactful than any other thing that she has received previously. Um, she's had difficult phases within life, and music is just one of those. And in it, her creative process is something that she comes back to every time. She poured her heart into the album of Mayhem and called the process both a heart surgery and a source of pain, but it also felt like a pivotal moment for her in her career. At this point, I want to insert a quote from French philosopher Henry Bergson's Creative Evolution. And granted, French philosophy is really wordy, but this is a short one. He says, evolution does not mark out a solitary route. It takes directions without aiming and ends, and it remains inventive even in its adaptation. And I think that is what Gaga is an example of. Unfortunately, the evolution for Katy Perry became stagnation, and for Gaga, it became more of a new light in her artistic journey. Gaga has clearly not been on a solitary route, as releasing Cheek to Cheek and Dawn of Chromatica being two huge collaborations. Katy Perry felt more solitary as most of her releases after Witness were solo ventures. Her retreat seemed to be less about discovering more and more about quelling the anxieties of the reactions. She hasn't really commented on 143. And Katy Perry addressed her mixed reactions to the release of Woman's World by explaining that the music video was meant to be a satirical take on male gaze and high gloss pop star videos. She even said in an Instagram video, like, it was very on the nose and slapstick and sarcastic, and reset before a bigger change. She also mentioned on Call Her Daddy podcasts that she was defending working with Dr. Luke, which womp womp. To me, her reaction to the criticism is just so blasé and blows over any major critiques that people have of her. It's a very rich person reaction. Gaga, on the other hand, has had the best reaction in years to Mayhem, in which she was super grateful. So far, like, fans have really loved Mayhem. In the reaction to Mayhem, Gaga told Billboard, I'm really grateful and I'm really beside myself. I never expect anything like this. This is really a true honor and a privilege. And in particular, fans have taken to social media to post videos of like choreo and fashion inspired by her new music, and which Gaga says she loves. Quote, between the dancing, the makeup, the hair, the costumes, it gives me so much life, and I'm really honored. All I ever want to do is make something that you press play again and feel good for the duration of the record, and maybe you play it again.
Doesn't matter
And
if you love him
yeah, Gaga, I
or
will play it
capital
again.
HIM.
The reactions to the public reactions say a lot, and I think Gaga seems to have nothing but grateful things to say and feels honored to have the little monsters. Katy Cats might be holding on for dear life at this point. Katy's less than subpar reactions to her critiques has been quite disheartening, and I don't know how much longer she can hold on to her fans. Of course, this isn't an analysis about fans. This is an analysis of the artistic drives and stagnation versus evolution. As someone who has gone through the Artist's Way book recently, I've learned a lot about trying to reinvigorate my artistic process, and I want this to be the last little segment of this podcast in order to tie things together. So, in Julia Cameron's Artist's Way, Cameron explains that blocked creativity comes from unprocessed emotions, fears, and old wounds. When we don't express ourselves, our inner artist gets buried alive under perfectionism, self criticism, or the voices of others. And I think those ideals may be what Katy Perry is feeling, and she's definitely listening to the voices of others but not interpreting it in the right way. Cameron says that creative stagnation often appears when we don't allow ourselves to play, experiment, or make bad art. The pressure to be good prevents us from making anything at all, and I think maybe that could have happened during her Prism era when she wasn't releasing any music at all. Granted, she was busy on tour, doing the Super Bowl, etc., but she didn't release much at all. And granted, we shouldn't have expectations for her to, but maybe she was losing interest in being a pop artist. Another reoccurring idea is that we stay stuck when we cling to our old identities. If we define ourselves by earlier failures or fixed self image, we cut ourselves off from the creative flow that wants to move through us. And I can't help but wonder if Katy Perry sees herself as masquerading as a pop star still.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine.
Like,
And you're
Gaga
not
is
really
Gaga
fine.
to the
You just
core,
can't get into it
but
because they would
it
never
feels like she has
understand.
evolved beyond the fame and into to more of a realized version of herself that can connect more with others as an artist. Katy Perry seems to be losing the sense of connecting with her fans and the connection of being an artist. And all that ties back to the block creativity and probably the unprocessed emotions because it feels like she is avoiding really talking about her her public perception. And in the artist's way, Cameron suggests that the creative evolution requires more of a gentleness rather than force, and we can grow not by pushing, but listening to our intuition and our curiosity and authentic desires. And when Katy Perry says she's masquerading as a pop star, I can't help but feel maybe her authentic desires don't really reside in wanting to be a pop star anymore. I think she wants to be a mother, and that's what a lot of Smile talks about, is her relationship with her daughter. She often, Cameron, often describes creativity evolution as a series of cycles: expansion, contrast, rest, inspiration. And stagnation can be part of the cycle. It's not a personal flaw, but it doesn't feel like Katy Perry is in the cycle. Gaga is in the cycle. She took time to explore other art forms. And a big theme as we grow older is we outgrow the old versions of ourselves. Cameron says that artists must continually shed past definitions and allow themselves to be beginners again, trusting that creative force that supports them. And I think with Cheek to Cheek and with Joanne, she was allowing herself to be a beginner again. One of my favorite quotes from The Artist's Way is, in filling the well, think magic, think delight, think fun. Do not think duty, do not what you should do. Spiritual sit ups like reading a dull but recommended critical text. Do what intrigues you, explore what interests you. Think mystery, not mastery. And I think that is a great example to end on. Gaga is the mystery of pop, and Katy Perry is the mastery of pop. When you become the master of pop, where do you go from there? You need some mystery again. And I think being the mystery is making you more of a master in art and not pop. So, to close this out, I kind of want to talk about my own journey with the artist's way. Like, I learned a lot about my criticisms of myself, and I wanted to talk about creative evolution versus creative stagnation because I think I definitely caught myself in a similar point to Katy Perry. Less so about public perception and more so about scared to creatively do something new. It's kind of frightening to want to put yourself out there and learn new things. And that's what I'm doing with this podcast. I'm kind of making time for my creative inner child, so to speak. Um, and I think like the general population sees creativity as a good thing. Like while being weird or a freak can be scary, I think it pays off in the long run. People love Gaga, and that's because she's a freak.
Shame on Lady Gaga.
And don't get me wrong, uh, capitalism does breed stagnation. Everyone's just kind of looking to grow numbers right now, and that's certainly Katy Perry with Dr. Luke in trying to produce old formulas in a new age.
Another one.
Capitalism in general just makes it so hard to be creative. Like, how are we able to make time to be creative in a hellscape like this? Both Katy Perry and Gaga are very privileged in the sense that they have the money to be able to take time off and learn new things and creatively divulge themselves. But evidently, Katy Perry doesn't really take this time to do new creative things. Instead, I think Katy Perry takes this time to avoid doing new things. And when she comes back to it, it's more so a maybe need for recognition or a need for money. But those are just questions I have in my head because I don't know everything that's happening in Katy Perry's head. But to look at where they are at this very moment in their own creative processes, like Gaga's still exploring things other than music. Like she has a makeup line now. House Labs is really popping off. Again, the Mayhem Ball has been happening, and she's been doing lots of little things on social media and collaborating with Wednesday and Do the Dead Dance. So Gaga's still getting out there and doing new things. And what is Katy Perry doing? She is reacting to the reaction of her of 143, and she released a new single called Band-Aids, and it is about the sinking feeling that she had with 143's public reception. And it just feels kind of baseline, and it's just a pretty boring pop song again from her. Where am I going with my artistic process, though? That's a good question. I think I want to continue developing this podcast, and I think I'm starting to create a new image for my art in general. I have a lot of ideas I'm working on, and I'm making sure that I'm holding myself accountable to doing them. I tend to get into cycles of avoiding it by scrolling on Instagram or looking at other creative things that have nothing to do with what I really want to do. And something is slowly but surely coming out of it. So, that was my first episode, and I want to thank you for tuning into it. I'm not really sure what's to come of it, but I'm here because I want to try it. And that's what means the most to me, trying new things. I'm not sure what the timeline is in terms of editing and producing, but my goal is to get at least one episode out a month right now. I work on these outlines when I can, and I'm really just grateful to have any time I can to be making this. I'm also open to suggestions of topics. I have a running list right now. Like, for example, I think it'd be fun to talk about the idea of lemonades in pop music, like Beyonce's Lemonade, and other albums about infidelity and comparing them and contrasting them, and how we talk about infidelity in general in music. Another episode idea would be hair and pop music. As I had referenced earlier, the fuck ass pixie cut that Katy Perry had. I think hair and pop music is important in solidifying genre changes or creative evolutions. So that could also be a fun topic as well. So thank you again for listening to this episode. I'm again Cole, and this has been Pop Save the USA. See you later.
Pop Save the USA.